I have the pleasure to introduce to you as the first speaker Ntuli. She used to work at the Department of Trade and Industry in renewable energy industries, managing a lot of the local content requirements. At that time, I went to see and interview her. She said, industry can be very creative. I also practiced her name on my way to the DTI, and then I really had it sorted out, and then I asked for her, and the three guys at the entrance couldn't help it, but they just burst out laughing. So stage is yours. Ntombi is going to tell us about a study she did with the Institute in Potsdam about scoping the assessment of co-benefits of renewable energy in South Africa. So she's going to mostly talk about South Africa. Later, Holle, who I'm going to introduce later, is going to talk about sub-Saharan Africa. And then Marie-Louise Van der Walt is going to speak about South Africa in the global setting. So it'll be interesting. Thank you.
Actually, the project that I'm going to speak about is a project that we are doing with... I need to figure out how to use this. I saw most of the speakers struggling. Okay, that works. So this is a project that we are currently doing. It's an ongoing project with the IASS, Potsdam, and other partners, which I'm going to talk about now. We're basically assessing the co-benefits of renewable energy in South Africa, but it is actually a project that is being rolled out in 4 other countries. So the aim is to identify, prioritize, and analyze country-specific co-benefits of climate change policies, obviously with the emphasis on renewable energy rollout in particular countries. So like I've said, we've got a team in Germany that has put together this concept to analyze the co-benefits in 4 countries. The team consists of IASS, which is the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. We also have the Renewables Academy, which I think most of you know. They're based in Berlin. The Independent Institute for Environmental Issues, and an independent consultancy, which is International Energy Transition. They're all part of the project. CSIR in South Africa is basically involved as a focal point, ensuring that the coordination of the project happens and ensuring the success of the project over the next 2 years. The other countries that are part of the project, basically implementing the same thing that we are doing, is India, Vietnam, and Turkey. So the big question when we often talk to people is, why do we bother to analyze the core benefits? Because, I mean, it's quite obvious. If you roll out renewable energy, you're going to get jobs. You're going to get community development and all of that. But then we turn around and ask them, do you know how many jobs that are going to be created? Do you know how much water is going to be saved? And then it's an aha moment, because suddenly they realize that actually we do need an analysis, and an analysis that is very specific to the conditions of South Africa, and an analysis that is linked to a planned renewable energy rollout in the country. So we want to look at the renewable energy from when you look at the climate change problem, most people often look at it from a burden perspective, like we have to share the burden, we have to mitigate climate change. But we're saying that there is an opportunity that we have to look at, and we need to start looking at this from an opportunity sharing perspective, and we have to seize the social and economic benefits that come with rolling out renewable energy. Currently, we have a Paris Agreement that binds us to certain climate change obligations, and from there, there's nationally determined contributions that each country that has signed or ratified the Paris Agreement has to develop, and South Africa is actually one of those countries. And if we look at that, the NDCs, how do they tie up to the core benefits of renewable energy? Those are the questions that we're trying to answer. So yeah, it's basically that, accelerating transformation to renewable energies as a key climate change mitigation strategy. Because sometimes we talk about clean energy and we almost forget the link with climate change. And so this is trying to tie everything together to say we implement renewable energy projects partly because we are trying to address the coal-intensive, or rather the carbon-intensive energy sector that we find ourselves in. And as we transition from that to the clean energy, what sort of benefits can we derive from that besides climate change mitigation? So even if you're speaking to the naysayers, when it comes to climate change, people who are thinking that it's actually just a big hoax, doesn't exist, but they cannot really argue against the benefits that you get from rolling out renewable energy projects. So this is a long-term project, I would say. We're going to be doing this for the next 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, where we've started now with establishing political partnerships, selecting and prioritizing the core benefits, and then also doing a capacity needs assessment. And we've also done a research needs assessment, and also just to establish a baseline of what research has been done in particular topics that we are focusing on. So this slide is just about presenting the full program from now we started in May up to the end of 2019. So after that, we'll do the core benefits assessment. And then once we are done with that, I'm going to explain that a bit later on. We are also going to focus on capacity building, which actually tries to capacitate us to seize the benefits and create an enabling environment to identify the benefits and actually make sure that the projects that we roll out as a country help us to achieve those core benefits. And then in the end, we'll close off with integration of core benefits assessment into climate policy. We are already talking to the Department of Environmental Affairs to ensure that as we go through this process, they are part of the process, and this is meant to derive the benefit for the climate policy in the country. So on one hand, we will have the core benefits training, which will be conducted by Renewables Academy based in Berlin. This training will be focused on country-specific benefits, and the target audience would obviously be project partners, the government, departments, and other stakeholders who might be interested in participating in that. And then in the end, like I've said, then the whole objective is to mobilize the benefits in the context of international climate change. So where we are now in terms of selecting and prioritizing the core benefits, first we had a focus group meeting where we invited relevant government departments, I would say DTI, Department of Environmental Affairs, Department of Energy, Department of Science and Technology, and we sat together, tried to identify priority policies in their departments that actually going to lead us to identifying these core benefits. What is it that as a department you're supposed to achieve, and how does renewable energy rollout respond to that? So from there, we ended up with the long list of core benefits. But then we thought we can't do studies for like a list of 15 things. So we need to shorten the list, and we need to prioritize what is actually immediate priority for the country, So we started engaging in bilateral consultations with government departments and other interested stakeholders. And then we also did an online survey to help prioritize of which departments, I think Sanedi, even ESCOM participated in, and that helped us to narrow down the list and to prioritize what these stakeholders think is important for South Africa. And then from there, so we had a list of 5, which I'm going to show just after the slide. We went into a research symposium where we identified different studies that have been conducted, but also what methodologies are available out there that can be used to assess various types of these co-benefits. From the research symposium, we also used that opportunity to further look at the prioritized co-benefits and see if this is really what we want to do. Like for instance, some of the things that we had prioritized, we realized that no, actually this is actually a very simple analysis. The data is already available, and we may not necessarily want into more detail. There are things that have not been done in South Africa that we need to focus on. From that list, then we are now busy with the terms of reference. From January next year, we are going to issue a request for proposal, and we are going to then conduct full-scale studies that focus on these particular topics that have been identified. I'm sorry, you may not be able to read this, but when you get a copy of the slides, you'll be able to understand what came out. But this is what came out of our first engagement with the government departments. If you look over there, they prioritize economic development and innovation, job creation, affordable electricity, securing reliable electricity, protecting the environment and scarce resources. So those were the I would say high-level groupings, and then we had subcategories as well that they have identified under that, and this is where we were able to identify what is it that we should focus on. In the end, after the symposium, this is what we have come up with. The studies that we are going to do now are going to focus on these 5 topics. Reduced electricity cost for residential and business prosumers. So if you produce your own electricity, how does it help you to reduce the electricity cost? And this also relies a lot on a policy framework being right and allowing businesses and residential consumers to be able to do that. Secondly, reliable power generation with wind and solar PV in terms of water scarcity. So as much as some of the things like attracting investments and all of that seemed to be priority, but we thought we've got more than enough research going on in those areas, and we've got more than enough data. But there are things like water scarcity that have not been addressed, and we thought perhaps this could be priority, and this is one of the studies that we are going to do. So in the renewable energy rollout, how much water are we going to be able to save, because this technology is less water intensive than coal. We will also look at the employment opportunities through renewables rollout, also across different skills levels. We'll look at the health benefits of growing the share of renewable energy in the electricity sector. And then finally, we'll look at economic prosperity of marginalized communities through growing the share of renewables. So to inform these studies that are going to be done, we looked at different scenarios that are already out there. Perhaps some of this can change. We are eagerly waiting for the announcement of the finalized IRP next week, and these numbers might obviously change, but obviously for now we're going to work with what we have. These are different scenarios, some in the draft IRP, and then also the CSIR least cost scenario, which I think is the most ambitious when it comes to renewable energy rollout. We're going to look at this, but we also thought that there is a scenario that could be developed as an addition, which looks at embedded generation and the capacity. It's just that it's very difficult to define because that market is not really well defined and we don't know the size. And so it is a possibility that we might look at that as well. So in terms of employment opportunity analysis, these are now just a bit of detail of what we think we could look at under these 5 topics. So under employment creation, we want to analyze the renewable energy deployment, analysis of job creation in these deployment scenarios that I have spoken about. But also in the context of a just transition from carbon-intensive economy to clean and renewable energy, we also want to understand the impact of job losses in the coal sector and try to present a net effect of renewable energy deployment on job creation. This has come up quite a lot when we engage particularly with the unions. They're quite concerned about if coal phases out, maybe the coal industry may not have jobs going forward. So this is a necessary analysis and we're gonna try to do justice to the topic. Economic prosperity of marginalized communities. The REIPP program has done quite a lot when it comes to communities, so we're going to look at that, but also the embedded generation market. There isn't much that has been done in that space, and we want to focus on that. If renewable energy is deployed in that market segment, what would be the impact on communities? There's also been a call for analysis of socially owned renewable energy. So we want to understand what this socially owned means and how can it be done in such a way that all the activist organizations and labor unions that have been making calls about this can also be satisfied. There might be different models being used in other countries and we might adopt that and do a thorough analysis when it comes to that. Health benefits, we've seen a lot of analysis being done on air quality, impact of coal-fired power stations, but what we want to do now is to build on that and analyze if you roll out the renewable energy based on the scenarios I presented earlier on, what the impact would be on health in the country. And then the last one is the water scarcity. Also, I think quite similar, we want to look at, with the increased share of renewable energy, what possible impact, or hopefully positive, can it have on our water resources in the country. So, like I've said before, the next step then will be to conduct the studies. We've already started with the terms of reference and we'll be issuing the request for proposals in the next 2 months. And while we are doing that, we'll also be busy with capacity building activities. And then in the last phase of the project, we'll deal with integration of co-benefits into climate policy instruments. Thank you very much.
My study did not look into good governance, but maybe we can have a discussion afterwards about how it does relate, because I'm sure we can find some interesting commonalities there. I am here in my capacity as a temporary consultant to IRENA, where I am working on an assignment just for the duration of this year, together with Sarah Stans, who's my colleague. She's currently at COP in Bonn, organizing a side event on the same study as well. I do have 2 other roles currently. I'm a research associate in Stellenbosch and also a consultant with Synergy Global, which is a social performance consulting company. The study I'm speaking about has a bit of a background, and the history started when I was sitting on a panel at SAREC, the South African International Renewable Energy Conference in 2015, together with Rabia. It was also on socio-economic development and socio-economic benefits in the renewable sector, and we started conversing afterwards around the lack of qualitative information, looking into renewable energy globally, specifically around community benefits. My PhD was looking into community benefits in South Africa specifically, and at that point I was looking to find a way to continue working on these topics. And my question to her was if she's got money for me. And she said not really. So I lobbied further, and it took about 2.5 years, and we did find some budget. We developed together a research that expanded my PhD across sub-Saharan Africa. So together with Sarah, we studied large-scale wind and solar projects across sub-Saharan Africa. And so much for that, sorry. Yes, so this slide is our official objective of the study, which has been defined by Arena as looking into the assessment of the multidimensional aspects of renewable energy as it relates to the implementation of a just energy transition. To do this, we're capturing insights, best practices, and lessons learned from projects across sub-Saharan Africa, looking at 4 different lenses, specifically community engagement and community benefit, skills development, job creation, and gender equality. This thing is tricky. Wow. We've got a research design that is purely qualitative and looked at us doing an appreciative inquiry using interviews and site visits across sub-Saharan Africa. Anyway, there's another slide. So Sarah and I visited 24 IPPs in 6 different countries. So we looked into identifying projects across sub-Saharan Africa that were further matured than financial close, so ideally in construction or operation. And we identified these in Senegal, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Namibia, and South Africa. We also looked in Zambia, Mozambique, but at that point in time, there was not much to be found in terms of construction on the ground. This information was not easy to come by. In South Africa, we've got the energy block, the logo on the bottom right, which provides great access to information for our industry here and the public. However, across Africa, that information is completely lacking in terms of public access. There's a UK-based database you have to subscribe to for a lot of money, but that's the only way to find information. We didn't have that money, so we Googled for a few weeks and identified these projects and this route. So we set off and we traveled for about 2 months, visiting project stakeholders and interviewing them about their experiences. Some of our emerging findings, and I won't share all of them because of time and it gets really, really complex, but I've just highlighted about 3 aspects per lens which stand out for us. To start off with, as a general finding, we really were struck by the lack of clarity and understanding of social performance in the renewable sector. That is specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. We've learned about that in South Africa, but it is a picture which holds true globally as well. The focus in anything linked to social performance is more on community benefits, so companies can relate to the term community benefits, but they do understand the term very differently. And in the projects, it materializes through various practices, a lot of them linked to CSR, so corporate social investment, but it's not necessarily, doesn't form part of the wider benefit sharing spectrum, which is possible to be deployed in communities. These 2 experiences are very, very similar in the extractive sector, which is where the sector was many years ago, but it has matured far beyond there. So this work is hoping to foster the conversation in the renewable sector in that regard. And lastly, there is a wide range of benefits projects can share locally, and we find that in an environment where legislation drives such, like in South Africa, the conversation is slightly more matured. That is an overarching qualifying statement. Our 4 lenses being community engagement and benefit, as in other community benefits, which will become more clear, skills development, job creation, and gender equality. These pictures don't illustrate the case studies. They're just pictures for the sake of having some visuals. So community engagement and benefit, the 3 examples I like to share with you are, on the first hand, community liaison offices, which is when a project establishes a physical presence in a local community, in a host community, and ideally staff such offices with trained community relations practitioners that can then hopefully communicate in local languages. And in some countries, specifically in South Africa, but also in Ghana, we do find that is practice. In Ghana, it is very much what is locally expected of projects to implement. Our second example is looking into the investment of CSR initiatives, so community benefits in South Africa. It would be through SED and ED. And in some places, projects have the ambition to implement not only community development, but low carbon community development. So this would be characterized by decisions made, for example, around solar water heaters, like on the picture, where a community might, or households might not have access to electric geysers, and there's a decision to be made how to provide hot water services, and a solar water heater is a more low carbon installation which can be chosen. And we find in Namibia, Rwanda, and in South Africa examples of that. Thirdly, specifically in South Africa, but I hope soon also in other countries, there are forums which have the ambition to coordinate the development spending across different sectors. So they would include local government, but also the mining sector, for example, or agriculture, or in our case, renewables, not or, and in our case, renewables, to really ensure that local economic development is planned, strategized, and coordinated from a multi-stakeholder perspective. So these are three examples which stood out for us as good practices across community engagement and benefit. In skills development, Saratech, you will, and you probably know, most of you do know it, we will hear more about it in the course of this conference, but it is a multi-stakeholder effort to develop renewable energy technology-specific unit standards and qualifications, for example, through the Wind Energy Service Technicians Program. In Kenya, we found a wind IPP that is collaborating with a local training institution to train community members in the installation of solar home systems and PV panels. So then these people were employed on site to implement systems, but also to implement in community facilities. Yeah, and the third example is in South Africa again, where we found a project that invested a lot of time and budget into facilitating a community-driven identification of skills development opportunities, specifically targeting the use and not only looking into renewable energy skills, but also across other possible qualifications. For example, carpentry, environmental monitoring, power tool handling. Yeah, there were various aspects which were identified in a community participatory way. Moving to job creation, the examples I'm sharing are mainly they mainly relate to opportunities which link to the demechanization of work processes on site. We found three examples of these, specifically in solar. In Rwanda stood out that for the panel cleaning and the water collection which is required to clean these panels, the company really dedicated or committed to a very slow process, so they didn't employ trucks or bakkies to transport the equipment and water, but they employed people to transport these by foot or by bike. In South Africa, there's an example of a bird monitoring company, which is a community-based company. And what this company does, the people watch the sky and see when a bird comes. And if it comes too close, if it's a specific bird and it comes too close to the turbine, they have the power to switch off a turbine for a certain amount of time for the bird to come past. It's real. Yeah, and then in various places we found really beautiful, transparent processes where companies and projects collaborated with local authorities in establishing job desks and skills desks. So instead of in isolation deciding on specific processes and how to recruit and how to identify which skills are available locally, they actually collaborated with the institutions who are mandated with local economic development in these places. Gender equality, it could almost be blank. We did not find much. Yeah, we're still grappling with what we did come across and how to make sense of it. And I did bring 3 examples, but I'm not proud of them. Yeah, the first is in South Africa. We do have, as part of REAP, a policy-driven incentive to procure from female or women-owned vendors, which on paper and in projects is what is said to be business. in terms of the evaluation, also what the IPP office shares, is not necessarily implemented in the most, in the best way it could be. So we do need to do a lot more work on that aspect specifically. I thought my presentation was going to be small. There's a pig. Yeah, so we found in a project that employed capacity to really do a very in-depth participatory planning process again, so with community members, but specifically around the topic of how to integrate or reintegrate single mothers into the job market. That was their community benefit, that was their CSI contribution. Yeah, and lastly, in Senegal, but also in South Africa, we did come across a few examples of women-led project developments. And in South Africa also, predominantly the economic development managers, that might be anecdotal, but are dominated by females. And in some countries, well, some projects, we do have the ESG teams being headed by women. So now this is not a good practice per se, or maybe not at all, but what we saw, or what our assumption is, what we could look further into is, if these teams are led by a woman, whether the relationship work on the ground tends to be biased towards established women-owned businesses, women associations, instead of going with usually male-dominated leadership structures. So it's more of a hypothesis and an observation, not really a good practice at this point. So, yeah, drawing out 5 preliminary reflections on the very top is that social risks associated with product development and operation are currently not sufficiently understood. Land acquisition, community engagement, recruitment strategies, they do carry sufficient risk, and neither the language nor the terminology nor the strategies or the reporting is developed to a point that would allow a confident assessment of projects, in my view. Skills development in local national communities is essential to receive opportunities, and it does require several years of preparation, which we do know in a policy uncertain environment is almost impossible to achieve. However, it is what is required in order to make a meaningful contribution. Similar in job creation and employment, which is the largest demand from communities, and obviously from government as well. But currently, neither the terminologies, the definitions, the reporting design lends itself to support decision-making or even a comparison across sectors, as we mentioned earlier on the core sector, for example. There's substantial research which is still required. And the research found women mainly in low-skilled jobs. That is cleaning offices, admin positions, security, panel cleaning. And in South Africa, we seem to think that the policy scorecard incentivizes gender equality in the workplace. However, the impact of that still needs to be seen. And lastly, land acquisition. The access to land is increasingly a challenge in various places, especially across sub-Saharan Africa, and the need for creative land acquisition is really, really urgent, and that needs to be conducted responsibly. We're going to have a specific highlight on land acquisition in the report because it really came out with very, very beautiful examples, but also some really, really difficult stories which aren't necessarily good practice, but they need to be reflected on. So I picked 3 recommendations, 3 for policymakers, and then 3 for industry specifically. First of all, we need to define our national expectations. In South Africa, we have supposedly attempted that through our scorecard. I think there is still a lot of work which can be done. In other countries, that has not been even started. However, renewable energy projects are being implemented already. So there's a clear disjunct in terms of terminologies, conversations, and timing as well. Then these expectations need to be monitored, not only through financial contributions or quantitative work, but also on the actual impacts achieved in communities and nationally. And in support of a domestic renewable energy industry, which is what a transformed energy sector might expect, there are certain requirements or conditions which can foster that, as for example, the staged implementation, especially across regional collaboration. So there on the skills development, for example, Saratec's, the facility of Saratec, which we have in South Africa, could easily serve the industry in Namibia. We've got 17 projects on the ground already for the refit. The first wind farm was just launched in Namibia. They're planning large-scale projects going forward. So there is really scope for a regional collaboration, not only in that regard, but also in East Africa, and looking into West Africa and how to connect capacities there. For industry, our wish list starts with a drastic enhancement of the capacity and application of social performance resources, not only across the project life cycle, but also across the project stakeholders. To, for example, have simple things in place like sufficient budget to execute the necessary community engagement at an early stage of development already. We have seen very, very difficult examples across the continent. And there's a lot of scope to improve practices, to also socially be more responsible, and to prevent risking delays in project approval as government understands more how project developments are undertaken. Thus, you need to have strategies and effective communication of your project's contribution to national development goals and objectives, which projects usually do contribute towards, but they lack an understanding and communication ability to really bring that across. And lastly, there's a need to enhance communication and follow-through also across the project lifecycle and project stakeholders on the expectations raised locally, which links to social performance capacity again, and also the conversation with government, which might prevent delays in the approval process. There will be far more detail and complexity and insights in our report, which will be released in February. Thank you.
Thank you, Holle, for this amazing study full of insights, slightly depressing, I would say. Thank you for the pig. Are there any questions to Holle? Yes, please.
Hi, ma'am. I wanted to ask about the gender equality thing. You say that it's only a hypothesis for now. So is there an actual plan that is put to place on with regards to how to help the single mothers get back into the world of work, and also a plan that is going to make sure that women are not allocated low-skilled jobs in the industry? And also, you spoke about that you interview projects and communities. I wanted to ask, if you interview them using surveys, do you do follow-ups on the projects as to have they fulfilled their commitments to the community?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. We did interviews, I think a total of 95 interviews. We didn't do any quantitative analysis, so there weren't surveys. There were visits usually and community meetings or meetings with project staff either on site or in the headquarters or in offices, with government also and with researchers in the country. So there were assessments of the monetary perception and expectations of stakeholders, and our scope does not look into following up to see if commitments have been achieved. It's more to gather intelligence on the expectations and practices currently in place. Our approach was to triangulate. So if a company says they're doing Y, we're going to speak to community members and community leaders, what their experience of these practices, and then also to government and researchers. So we try and ascertain a certain level of certainty around an information. The project I mentioned with the single mothers, it's part of their socioeconomic development, enterprise development commitment, which they have to invest on a quarterly basis because they're part of the South African policy environment. And that project has developed very beautiful and detailed plans on how to do that. I can share some more detail with you later if you wish. There was a second part to that question, huh?
Okay, I don't remember the second part, but I wanted to ask, wouldn't you rather consider surveys in your scope of work so that you find out about the numbers that are actually, because numbers speak volumes, you understand? So if you find out about, not really speak to the people that are in charge of the community, but rather the people of the community, so that the benefits are they do get the benefits of the project.
Yeah.
Understand?
There is a lot of scope for more research over the next 20, 50 years. For us, it was a big task already to identify where these projects are, which was a lot of tedious work. And then even when we were in countries, sometimes government officials didn't know more than we did. In fact, they did know less. So there was quite an active exchange of project information. So it's not easy to find out where these projects are, even though they are in existence physically already. And then our task was to look into what are the emerging practices. So it was a qualitative exploration as a first step. So later follow-up work into impact assessments, and what Ntuli also spoke about, the co-benefits and the various methodologies to assess the impact thereof. That will all have to happen, yeah. So it's a wide research agenda, which we need to foster across the continent.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Hala, for the presentation and the project. I think it's wonderful, and I hope to talk to you more about it. I have a question about similarities amongst developers and whether you saw any clustering behavior. So I'm not sure, or maybe you could share with us whether there were certain repeat players in various areas and whether they were engaged in the same practice, or if they did different things in different countries or with different projects, because for me that's kind of telling. I think about policy and how policy could drive some of this. So I guess to drill down, my question is, were there certain players who were acting in different areas again and again, and were they doing the same things, or were they doing different things based on where they were operating?
Yeah. In terms of patterns, certainly the policy environment and legislation influence corporate behavior a lot, and that's speaking from a South African perspective, but also in Namibia, where there is a certain PDN or BEE-related agenda, which is implemented in policy. So there was a clear pattern and a change in specific corporate behavior. Then companies which had experience either in the implementation or development of products in South Africa, they usually had a better understanding or an easier into a conversation around community benefits elsewhere as well. So we found, in various places, experienced project construction managers, for example, they had done construction in South Africa. Because here there was a high requirement to create local jobs in local communities, they would take a similar approach in other places and come with a predefined idea of what you need to have in place in terms of processes to guarantee your social license to operate. And with that I suppose a certain openness to speak to government as well about what is happening on site. So we saw a learning coming out of the South African stakeholders. A learning amongst the stakeholders that had implemented in South Africa. Yeah, that very clearly. Yeah, on the other side, companies which weren't necessarily that experienced in South Africa, but coming maybe from other places in the world, there was a greater naivety, I would carefully but partially say.
Okay, thank you very much, Holla.
So I wanted to start with this picture, which is about technologies and how rapidly technologies have been developing and have been adopted in recent years. So if you look at this, at the slide, the timeline, so at the bottom is a timeline, so it's up to 40 years. And then if you look to the left axis, it looks at different technologies and how long it's taken for those technologies to be adopted by 50 million active users across the world. And as you can see, the radio was developed in 1958, and it took 38 years for the radio to reach 50 million active users. And then as you progress up this the timeline, you'll see that the duration of time that it takes for technologies to be to reach that level of market penetration has shortened drastically. Similarly, towards the end of 2000 and almost just around 2010, it took about 60 months for a vehicle design cycle to go through its full cycle to get to market. 5 years later, it only took between 24 and 36 months to go through the same cycle. So the basically the message is that the pressure is on, and technology has become, it's moving faster, it is developing quicker, it's being adopted much more rapidly than it had ever done before. And the reason I'm telling you this is because renewable energy and clean energy has become a technology issue far more than it has become an energy issue. So that's the starting point, or the perspective with which we started this work. So the point of departure was basically that there are 5 driving factors or major global trends that is converging to a point where we do no longer have a major option other than to have a renewable-rich energy future. The first one is the very obvious fact that renewable energy has become really low cost, and it has declined. I mean, I'm assuming everybody here has been following trends in the last few years, but since between 2009 and 2016, the cost of wind power has dropped by 66%. The cost of solar PV has dropped by 85%. And as a consequence, in the last 2 years, or in 2015 and 2016, new capacity additions across the globe has outpaced, of renewable energy or clean energy, has outpaced any other form of energy or new capacity build. In 2015 was the first year, and it was 51%, and then in 2016 that was 53% of new capacity that from renewables. At the same time, which is also a technology issue, we're having energy storage, infrastructure, network infrastructure, intelligent infrastructure, all of those technologies that are also rapidly developing at the moment. And we're looking at, I think, a 73% cost decrease in battery technology over the last, I think, also about 10 years, and predicted to reduce the cost to reduce by another 77% by 2030. And if we look at the adoption trends and the rate of technology change in the last few years, it's very likely that this may even accelerate faster than predicted. Then the third thing that has happened in the last 2 years, and obviously everybody's well aware of the fact, is the fact that the Paris Agreement was reached, and South Africa ratified the Paris Agreement along with 145 other countries. And in our ratification of it, it has gone through a process of consideration with the National Assembly, the Council of Provinces, and meaning that it becomes a legally binding commitment that South Africa has made. So that's specific to South Africa, but on a global level, that is indicating a very clear commitment towards achieving decarbonization by some time after 2050, and at least making massive progress towards decarbonization in the interim. Unfortunately, within this environment where renewable energy is so quickly becoming a no-brainer, we come to a point where this should become easier than we may have expected even 2 years ago when the Paris Agreement was signed. And then 2 regional considerations. The first one, the fact around suppressed demand in SADC. If you look at the SADC region, or the South African power pool, not considering South Africa, we have some of the lowest electrification rates in the world. In fact, we are about 60% below any of the other emerging economies that we can benchmark ourselves against, about 60% lower than the Caribbean and Latin America. So there's an enormous potential for electrification, but there's at the same time enormous need for low-cost energy, because if it was going to be done in any other way, it would have happened already. So the fact that renewable energy has become so cost-effective means that that need can begin to be addressed, and is likely to be addressed by renewable energy. And then lastly, of course, South Africa is in much need of affordable clean energy, not only for electrification for the remaining 10% of our country, which is mostly remotely located, the areas that haven't been electrified, but also to support our struggling economy. And it would have to be affordable in order to do that, which means that we have almost the holy grail of energy supply going forward, which is the renewable energy, rich energy future, which means that it's more clean jobs. Based on current modeling, that would mean the highest job supply, lowest water use, lowest emissions, least demand on the fiscus, and also gives us quick and modular solutions in an environment where everything is changing, where our growth in demand is not taken off as predicted. Technologies are changing, so there may be new solutions coming into play that we're not even aware of today, that displace the old ideas of doing things, but also new paradigms. So having that ability to be flexible and agile to respond better to the changing needs gives us a very good advantage. So despite the inertia that we have been experiencing in our country in the last 2 years, which has been very discouraging, in the longer term, and if we take a longer term view, the likely outcome would be that renewable energy is going to play and make a major contribution going forward. So then the thought, the consideration becomes how much, how big is this contribution likely to be? So South Africa's last bid window was beginning about mid-2015, at which point we got really good prices and very competitive bidding, oversubscribed. Since our first bid window, the first bid round, every bid round after the first bid round had been oversubscribed, and South Africa benefited from this cost competitive or this competitive bidding process by achieving very low bid prices. But subsequent to our last bid, and as you can see on the slide, the bids that followed across the world, across all types of economies, continued to decline, offering us even or the potential or suggesting that we may even be able to achieve lower prices going forward. And the grey band is the fossil energy band, and you'll see that the prices are dropping right through that at the moment, which is quite heartening. It also means, just on that, it also means that we get to buy more energy infrastructure at lower costs. So if you look at investments in the world, the investments have tailed off, but the actual capacity that's contributed has continued to increase, which is also very heartening. So then just a quick look at this. The analysis on the left-hand side was done by the CSIR and has been submitted as part of the IRP response. And basically what it shows is what is the lifetime cost of different technologies, and you'll see on the left-hand side variable solar PV, variable wind, compared to baseload IPPs, and then as well as forecasted and predicted other technologies. What we have since seen following that is I'm showing three bids or indications of bids. The first one is a recent bid round that was concluded in Saudi Arabia, where we had the lowest price at $1.79 cent per kilowatt hour, which works out at the exchange rate at the time at around 27 cents for South Africa. The average across that 8 bids, only one of them was more than 3 cents, and if you look at the average, it was about 45 South African cents. The bid for wind, there's another 400 megawatts out for wind, which hasn't closed yet, so we're keeping our eyes peeled, and I'm sure that will be very interesting. And then that was followed by Chile. So the Saudi situation was ascribed to very low financing costs, very large plants, which means that there's economies of scale, and nobody was sure as to whether that pricing is going to translate to a similar trend for other countries. Then in Chile, very recently, we had a bid that closed that included a variety of renewable energy sources, and we had a similar trend where it closed at about 49 cents per kilowatt hour. At the same time, Meridian Economics released a report or submitted a report that went to Parliament in the discussions around the Eskom inquiry at the moment, in which they suggested that the Medupi and Kusile price lease cost levelized cost of electricity is more likely to be around R1.70 and R1.90 per kilowatt hours. Now, this right-hand side, please it's not any official analysis, it's basically just a snapshot of what's happening in the world at the moment, but emphasizing the fact that the trend is continuing down for renewables, whilst the trend for fossil fuels and traditional conventional energies continue to increase. So South Africa's planning at the moment is already reflecting the change. So from the IRP 2010, the IRP 2013 unpublished version or unofficial version, and then the subsequent draft IRP 2016, you can see that there's quite a change in the percentage of renewable energy that is being incorporated. Unfortunately, I don't think that the planning as yet is taking full cognizance of the changes that is happening in the world in terms of the technology advances. I saw that Jinko Solar had just had a record 23.5% efficiency on their solar panels. There's continual development, and at the same time, the prices are coming down. So I don't think that our planning is yet reflecting that. But still, the middle scenario, which is the base case, suggests that we will have about 51 gigawatts of renewables by 2050, of which 30 gigawatts would be from wind. In the response to the draft IRP, the CSIR did extensive modeling, various scenarios, and what was included in their modeling as a least cost scenario suggested that renewables could be as much as 164 gigawatts by 2050, and of which 85 gigawatts would be from wind. Now, yeah, so let's come back to that. But effectively, between that 30 megawatts and the 85 gigawatts, sorry, between the 30 gigawatts and the 85 gigawatts, we get a cone of possibility within which we would expect the industry to fall. So we've considered the cost implications. We've considered the fact that clean energy and technology has become economically the most obvious option or one of the most obvious options as part of your energy mix. But at the same time, we also have the very deep and broad benefits that are associated with having a renewable energy rich future. So if you look at compare the two options or the two scenarios, which is the draft IRP 2016 as it was published for public comment, and the least cost scenario that was developed by the CSIR, we see it's about 101 million tons of CO2 less that is produced per annum by the least cost scenario. That means that the power system will be producing double the energy output that it is currently doing, and the amount that Eskom is currently reporting in their annual report as their annual generation or supply, but with 40% less emissions. That is quite significant benefit offered by the least cost scenario. At the same time, if we look at water consumption, the least cost option will only use about 15 billion liters of water per year compared to the 51 billion liters of water consumed per year by the base case. If we consider that difference in terms of what the daily consumption is for a human being, the World Health Organization suggests about 7 liters as a bare minimum per human being per day. They aim to get at least to 20 liters per human being per day. The Water Association Infrastructure or International Water Infrastructure Association suggests 50 liters per human per day. If we consider the 50 liters, that would mean 1.4 million people can get water in a year based on the difference, the water saving. Now, South Africa is already a water scarce country. We know that. If you're in Cape Town at the moment, if you're not aware of the fact, then I'm very concerned. Please only take a 1-minute shower. But to supply water for an increased demand means building infrastructure, bringing in water from neighboring countries. That economic impact has not even been quantified yet. So this type of saving means an enormous amount in terms of economics as well as in terms of environmental benefits. Then the same modeling from the CSIR also suggests that that we would be able to generate or create 324,000 jobs with the least cost scenario as opposed to the base case scenario. This modeling only takes into consideration direct jobs for the construction and operation of the plants, as well as the first level of suppliers. It does not take into consideration induced and indirect employment beyond that or lower down in the value chain. A McKinsey study, which I probably shouldn't say, but released suggestions that could be at least almost about 3 times the direct employment. So that could be significantly higher. And then an IDC study that looked at even further down the value chain suggested that it could be about 2 jobs per 2 jobs per megawatt installed capacity for wind, and 4.5 times that for the manufacturing and broader benefits. So we could look at anything from 123,000 employment opportunities just for the wind sector by 2050, and the potential for that to be as many as 500,000. Now, in our country at the moment, I think our unemployment rate is suggests we have about 6.5 million people unemployed at the moment. So 500,000, recognizing of course that it's in 2050, but that is quite a substantial percentage of what we're currently experiencing as unemployment. And then the last 2 that I'm showing here is socioeconomic development as well as the broad-based black economic empowerment and equity shares and empowerment share. Now, this is based on using the REIPP as a proxy for this. Thanks. As a proxy for the potential. Now, the Renewable Energy IPP program, procurement program, has done a great job to multiply the benefits of renewable energy. And as we've already heard, the incentives program is requiring a minimum threshold for participation in the program. However, it's not fail-proof, and the government has already recognized this and have tasked the IPP office to re-look how that program is going to be structured going forward. So I would expect to see that those broader developmental benefits are leveraged even more and more effectively going forward. However, in the absence of knowing how it's going to be restructured, we use the program as it stands to suggest what the opportunities may be. And it would mean an enormous contribution towards socioeconomic development and also to localization or local content and other equity benefits in the country. And at the same time, the least cost scenario would cost us between 75 and 90 billion rands less than the base case. So the Renewable Energy IPP program has already demonstrated that it can establish a local industry. And by 2015, we had 12 new businesses manufacturing facilities that had been created in the country. And the majority of those had been created in the 2 years prior to 2015, which suggests that people had to grow confidence in the process before they were prepared to invest. And then we had 2 years of no major movement in the industry. And as a consequence, we've seen the majority of these closed down. If I remember correctly, 5 of them had closed already, five of them are currently under review, and 2 of them are currently still operational and likely to continue so because they've got a more diverse focus. The consequence of that is significant job losses, investments that are either at risk or have already been lost, and future investments that have not been made. And we've already seen in the last few weeks that today there was an article suggesting that South Africa will struggle to achieve the same level of investment interest going forward. So there's definitely a challenge around the current system, the current inertia. But the potential exists, and if we can fully harness it, we should have a really good green economy established around the program. So this is the last slide, I promise. Basically to say that South Africa has embarked on a journey towards a sustainable energy future. We've made the commitment. Our policy framework, our national development plan, our constitution, our energy white paper, everything suggests that we have made a commitment towards a clean energy and a sustainable energy future. Our ratification of the Paris Agreement has further confirmed that. So in 2011, South Africa became one of the first countries to benefit from the transition that's happening in the renewable energy space. Of course, as we all know, in 2015 we had the Eskom impasse of the signing of PPAs, but it should be considered in this broader context of where the world is going, where technology is going, and where South Africa is likely to want to go and to have to go, irrespective of any minor detours in the meantime. In 2015, we had the Paris Agreement, which means that renewable energy will have to play an anchor role going forward. It also means that we've committed to complete decarbonization, and our INDC already suggests that that is the plan, that the energy sector is intended to decarbonize. And despite the current uncertainty, this future, or this journey has been safeguarded by three things. The first one is the low cost of renewable energy, which has basically changed everything in the last 2 years. The fact that the energy-rich planning scenarios provides us with much broader and much more, much deeper societal benefits. And then lastly, the fact that it is aligned with our legal and regulatory regime. So there shouldn't, in all expectation, we should see renewable energy with a very bright future. All roads lead to Rome, or to renewable energy. And that's it.